Hello, hello. This is Tyler James, and I have a great conversation coming up for you today. My guest today is the writer and creator, best known for his long-running comic Afterlife Inc., and as well as numerous other comics. He's the co-founder of Big Punch Studios. He also writes for video games, including the upcoming Toxic Crusaders game from RetroWare. Welcome to Comics Launch for the first time, Jon Lock. How you doing, John?
I'm very well, thank you for. Yeah, it's a very flattering description there. But yeah, thank you. Yes, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. Whenever you have projects that are live on Kickstarter, you're even more hyper aware of all the cool stuff that's going on the Kickstarter platform. And so I saw that you launched a project, which is the Comic Writers Journal. And I'm a journal junkie, a huge fan of resources and aids and tools that help creators do the work that we do. And so I wanted to reach out to you and talk to you about it. Can you, but before we dive into this specific process, fill in a little bit of gaps, tell me a little bit more about your story. How'd you get into this world of creating, making comics and so on?
Well, yeah, I've been doing this for about probably a decade or so now. My comic Afterlife Inc., which you very kindly mentioned, just hit its 10-year anniversary last year, which to celebrate, it did quite a large. Well, it's all relative, isn't it? For me, it was quite a large Kickstarter to do the entire run so far as as these two big hardbacks, these two A4 hardbacks. That was about 800 pages, and that felt like quite a milestone because it was like 10 years of this comic, which was my baby, but also 10 years of like indie kind of publishing. And when I started out in the UK comic scene, that there wasn't a Kickstarter. I remember when it first launched in the UK. I remember like a bunch of my friends who I'd met through comics. They were going, "Oh man, we should do a Kickstarter. We should." Everyone was racing to go. Who's going to be the first one to do it? And I was a bit late to the party, and I was like, "Oh, maybe I'll try putting one of these Kickstarters together." And then when the time came to actually launch, this was like 2013, 2012 sort of time in the UK when it came over here. And I think I ended up being one of the first because despite being like the last to hear about it, I just got to launching a project sooner. And I think back on it and how like my first project was so terribly run. I didn't know what on earth I was doing back there, but somehow, incredibly, thanks to some very generous people, we kind of made it work.
Well, there's there's a saying or a parable. I'm going to butcher it, but like it's something to do with like the pioneers get the arrows in the back, and then they take all the arrows for the settlers, who then come and build upon that. So yeah, I mean, back in the early days, to be one of the first creators to launch in the UK on Kickstarter, before there was a network really and a community and all of these best practices out there. You're really just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and trying to see what sticks. So thanks for taking those arrows on behalf of all
thank
of
you.
us.
Yeah, well, this was this was kind of like the sepia toned British version of it, but yeah, since then, as I'm sure you can attest, like it's just become such a major part of everyone's lives, and for us now, it's like I'm in this little team called Big Punch Studios. We've been going since 2015. It's two married couples working together. We're all creators, and like Kickstarter's always been a big part of everything we do. We made a card game back in 2015, back in the days when Kickstarter still did like a project of the day. So yeah, inexplicably, we for one day of our campaign, we were like just randomly, the hand of God said, "You're now project of the day," which was a fantastic boost for us. And if we hadn't had that original Kickstarter on that game, we couldn't have then gone on to do bigger print runs down the line. And that game, that Sandwich Masters game we made, really kind of transformed transformed our business really. So like, I don't know, I'm rambling now, but it's halfway between kind of like doing what you can at conventions and selling stuff across the table, and the rest of it is a big part of it's Kickstarter. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure you've found this a little bit, is that when you can start to see the parallels between the convention experience and how, you know, some of the skills that you acquire there in like real hand-to-hand, like conversational tones with people in real life, when you're able to start applying those to the Kickstarter platform, like the things can be more successful, and combining Kickstarter plus conventions has always been, you know, much more of a nice marriage than trying to do either or just alone. So yeah, that's a good thing. But yeah, so I mean, you know, we could talk about the evolution of Kickstarter. I'm sure we'll get into some of that with what's changed since that very first launch and things like that. But I don't want to bury the lead here. The Comics Writers Journal. This is a new project that you have live. What can you tell us about this project?
Well, it's something I've had in the works for a while now. Like I've been writing comics for, like, as I said earlier, a better part of a decade now, and some of those skills have transferred into doing the video game writing now for clients. And always had quite big ideas. Always had quite kind of beyond my kind of station really when it came to like storytelling. And Apple, I think in particular, has a plot which has been developing over 10 years. There's, you know, kind of five or so more years in it, like 3 more volumes could go. So like for me, knowing how to structure a story has always been one of like kind of the biggest skills I've had in my arsenal really. And being quite an ordered writer, like needing everything kind of planned out before I even started on the script, I had this kind of method, which I'd always just been doing in the background to make sure my stories were always balanced, and I always knew what was happening on any page, regardless of whether I was telling an 8-page comic or an 800-page comic. So with that in mind, I decided to kind of like codify some of that process into a journal. And compared to some of the comic stuff, you know, I just, you know, those bigger projects I was working on, and then in the background I'd just be toying with the journal and perfecting it and getting feedback from people. And yeah, like, and then finally, after, you know, several months of development, decided to just kind of go for it and get it out into the world. And so yeah, now the journal is with the caveat of it's not telling you how to make a comic. I was very keen on that. I don't believe in kind of saying there's one particular way of doing things, but the journal provides you with a series of customizable templates. It provides you with a process to help you get the most out of your story without ever kind of railroading you into doing it one particular way. That was the goal. So at the start of the book, there's a introductory section which guides you through the process of planning an 8-page story. So you can follow it with guided examples really. And it takes you through the process of creating a summary of your story. So challenging you to describe your story in a sentence, in a paragraph, to list the key developments or a key question at the heart of your story. And then it goes into, and you've just brought it up on the screen here, it goes into the stage where the end goal of this is to produce a page plan. So to be able to write one sentence for every page in your comic. Now, the bigger your story, that would be very hard if you just dove in from nothing to go, oh, heck, what's going to happen on page 57? You know, but yeah, it takes you through the process of breaking it down into scenes, to thinking critically about how to allocate your page count to where it's going to be the most effective. And then at the end of it, you've still got to write the script, but before you even start writing the script, you have these tools in hand. You'll have a completed overview, a completed page plan. And those are the things which then give you the freedom to just dive into writing your script.
Yeah, well, and that's certainly key, always been key for me. You know, I've never been someone who has ever been able to just sit at a blank keyboard with a white screen. My friend Steve Forbes, I think, calls it the white bull or something, but it's just like the white screen that's staring you back, unless I've got my notes and I've got my breakdowns, and I have, like you said, well, here's the one sentence that's on this page, or here's some loose thumbnails or things like that. Like the more offline, done by hand stuff that I have been able to accumulate and fill up before I actually sit down, the more likely I am to have some success at the keyboard in a writing session. So as someone that has obviously thought a lot about this and has written for a number of different mediums, like what would you say some of the sort of unique challenges that comic book writers specifically have to think about, some of the unique challenges to writing for the medium of comics?
Oh, almost without a doubt, it's a medium of restriction. People, I don't think people initially realize that when they're coming to kind of writing a comic, because in prose, which is a completely other skill set, which I'm not even sure I have. Like I've spent so long just doing comic scripts, but like if you want to write a scene, be it an epic battle or an intimate personal moment, the only limit is your words. You can really get everything down on the page that you want to. Comics, however you spin it, are very expensive. They could be expensive in terms of money, if you're commissioning artists, or they could be very expensive just in terms of the physical challenges, the physical requirements of making them. They're very, very, very labor intensive, as anybody who's been in this world will tell you. And so, it'd be lovely to say, oh, I was going to write a 100-page comic, a graphic novel, but then I really wanted to expand this scene and make it a 50-page fight. It's like, well, somebody's going to have to pay for those pages, and you're going to pay in money or tears. So having a page limit is very important. Actually, it can feel restrictive, but it can actually be quite liberating, because you have to allocate those pages as best you can to suit your story, and that ties into the sense of time, the sense of progressing time in a comic, because that's, I think, quite a skill in itself. Like, much as if you were filming a movie and you were filming it on actual film, you'd pay for the film. You might buy, I don't know how much an average movie might be, but you might buy like a kilometer of film, and that's going to give us, 4 hours of shooting. So you have, every second it has to be accounted for. And I think that's the thing with comics. It's like, you might say, you think back to all the comics you've read in your life, and you might go, oh, I bought a month, I bought like a floppy. I bought like a monthly 22-page comic. It could be of, Green Lantern or something. You say to yourself, did it feel like a big moment? Did it feel like value for money, whatever that means? Because, I've read 22-page comics, which I could read the whole thing in 30 seconds. It felt like I've just flown through it. And then other ones, they can be really dense. Like that moment can get stretched. That sense of time can get stretched. And that's all in the subtlety of the storytelling and how you compress or expand time to fit your page count. You look back at some of to use Western superhero comics as an example, you look back at some of the stuff in the 60s and, stuff that Marvel was doing. It was all one and done, standalone 22-page stories. And, they could go to the other side of the universe and back, sometimes in the span of 2 panels. And then you got this decompressed storytelling in the early 2000s where, you could have 4 issues and arguably nothing happens in those 4 issues, because it could just be one big fight. But it's done with such style and emotion and panache that you realize that, like, oh, how they chose to spend those panels, even though they are technically wasting 22 pages because nothing's happening. There's actually so much happening if you're willing to kind of look for it. So yeah, I think that's the real thing. Like, I think sometimes sitting down and going, well, my story is just A through B through C, and that's the end, misses some of the wonderful nuance that you can do, that you can bring to it, a story, when working in comics. So yeah, that's my weird little take on it anyway.
Yeah, and I think you raise a number of good points, and I've always been of the mindset that it's often the constraints that sort of set you free as a creator, because it bounds the thing that you're actually trying to create, so that you're not tackling any and everything. It's, hey, this is going to be a staple bound thing that's going to limit how much real estate you're going to have to tell this story. On the comic itself, each page can only fit so many panels. Each panels can only fit so many word balloons. Each word balloon can only comfortably fit, although folks like Brian Bendis or Alan Moore will push the envelope on what can actually fit in the balloon. But there are constraints right there. But if you choose to let those be beneficial, I think it's one of the reasons why comics is able to be like a serial format where people can put out stories on a regular basis. I don't think it's a surprise or even a shock that like someone like George R.R. Martin like has had trouble finishing these novels, which can be any length. But the TV show actually, came out faster, even though it involves all these other people. But, it's like, hey, we're going to give you this much time. Each each episode is going to be constrained to this. So, yeah, I think when you can embrace those constraints, it's a good deal. So speaking of that, what are any other features that you want to call out about the Writer's Journal? I one thing that immediately struck familiar with me was the page breakdown, just the way you sort of call out the double page spread, or the double pages, and the single page, and the odd and evens, and how important that is. And that's a little exercise that when I am doing my writing on my legal pads or whatever, I actually go and create those same little brackets to make sure that I'm accounting for those things. But why is that something that you chose to include in this journal, and why is that important for the script writers?
Clearly, you gravitate to doing that right out the gate, because I think if you've spent time writing for comics, like you come to understand how important a page turn can be. Like it's a curious medium in that, being so visual, but the reader has so much freedom over the pace of the book, so sometimes the only way you can build suspense, the only way you can have a big reveal, is to know exactly where it's going to fall on a double page spread. It's this weird geometry of a story. And much like yourself, it was always the first thing I'd do. I'd work out where are those page turns going to fall, where's the double page spreads, where are the splashes. I remember I think when I got to my third volume of Apple, I think, treating myself to my very first double page spread image, and that felt like such a luxury. Like I really felt I'd earned it at that point. And and again, like the impact of that, of being able to build to a thing. And I'd hate to plan that moment and then realize that it fell across the wrong couple of pages. But yeah, even little things like when it comes to like indie publishing, you're probably not going to be, maybe you're not doing the kind of classic 22-page Western model where, where's that title page going to be? Where's that kind of the prologue going to lie? Because I mean, how many, you think about how many kind of like comics you've read where there's always a big moment on, the second or third page, because of course you've got that opening teaser before you hit the story beat proper. So yeah, like for me, that's just knowing where those page breaks fall is one of the biggest tools in your arsenal. And then and then sadly you've got to kind of come up with a compelling story to hang on it, basically. The easy part.
Yeah. So for this journal, how many stories do you anticipate that like someone could plan with a journal? Is it meant to be like one journal per issue, or what's your approach now that you're going to print up a batch of these and use these to go forward? But how do you sort of see this being an ongoing tool, or how you're going to incorporate it into your flow?
Well, there's plenty of space in the journal. The journal is 150 pages, and so again, with the goal of producing a summary, an overview, and a page plan for your story, the book has like a number of templates to kind of accommodate. It's not just one story per book. We've got a great number of just blank templates for the a 22 page if you're doing the kind of issue format. We have a number of templates for short stories, maybe like an 8-pager. Then we've got a freeform section, which is just a much longer, open-ended, unnumbered section where if you want to tell, if you want to go to your graphic novel, if you want to go to your epic, you can just kind of do it there. So yeah, there's plenty of space for multiple stories in the book is the idea. I think I really wanted to make sure people got the freedom to get a lot out of it, basically.
Yeah. Very cool. Now, I guess as someone that is also writing for games, like what are some of the similarities and differences that you've found in terms of how you approach writing for comics versus how you approach writing for games?
I think the biggest difference was breaking down the language of talking in pages and panels, which obviously sounds obvious in hindsight, but one of the nice things about working on Toxic Crusaders was the freedom the developers and the publishers gave me to kind of make my own format for the scripts and the stories and kind of come up with my own language of that. So, whereas in comics, it would all be broken down by, as I said, pages and panels being that, kind of primary unit of measurement for the comic.
Yeah.
And, it was now we have there's overlap because we have motion comics, we have animated motion comics between the levels. Just going to talk about a moment, like what is a moment in the comic and in the game, and a little encounter, if you will. So it was coming up with my own kind of units of measurement to how the story was going to pan out. But I think one of the benefits of working in comics first and then coming across to video games was, as you alluded to earlier, the idea that there's only ever so much you could fit in a panel. Like how many words can fit in a speech bubble, and that kind of lent itself quite well to video game writing, which, because there's action going on in the screen, you're required to be punchy. It's got to be like, you don't want an essay. Well, I mean, depending on the game, maybe you do, but like in this context, you didn't want like a wall of text turning up to distract you from gameplay. It had to be these kind of pithy little kind of snippets of dialogue, which lent itself, drew upon the comic stuff quite well. The a lot of the dialogue in the game is very these little encounters, these little moments, these little interactions would pop up during gameplay. So it would be very much like character A says one thing, character B responds. So you get these little comedic back and forths, which might really only be 3 to 4 bubbles, if you will, if you're using the comic terminology. But it was a lot like writing. It was a lot like writing for a comic, actually, or that skill set was very transferable. But I mean, we sometimes it was directly one-to-one. It was doing these writing for these animated comics, and it was for me, I just had to start thinking about, okay, what's going to be a background image, and then what's going to be a floating frame, if you will, like something that's kind of popping up or interactable. So had to get my brain in gear, but once I did, it wasn't too different. It wasn't too different to comics.
Nice. Yeah. And as I worked in games for about 9 years. And so, yeah, I totally understand there's constraints there, writing too much dialogue and all of a sudden your UI breaks and it won't fit. And then you have to go reconfigure things. That could be an issue. So good to know. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a little bit earlier, your work on Afterlife and how you recently put out the 2 hardbacks 10th anniversary collection. You mentioned that this is you've got 6 volumes, but plenty more coming. When did you realize, or how far into it, or did you realize that this was going to be a title, a project that you were sort of committed to working on for like a decade or more?
Well, again, this is the thinking big, the dreaming big thing, isn't it? I grew up like the comics that inspired me growing up were, I was a bit late to the party, but the comics that were coming out from like Vertigo, the work of Grant Morrison, like the idea, a time in comics where you could happily tell a 6-volume, an 8-volume, a 10-volume epic, and nobody batted an eyelid. I guess there was nobody telling them they couldn't. And I think in a weird way, I think kind of by the time I started telling the stories I really wanted to, I think probably tastes have moved on a bit. And I think the idea of doing a big, long-running series of this type would probably be relatively rare in the mainstream industry, let alone in the indie side of things. And so it's funny, like you start out and people go like, "Oh, your first book, there's a novelty to it. It's very kind of exciting." And then you go, "Oh, you made a sequel. That's cool." And then they're like, you do a third one, and they're like, "Oh, wow, you're really keeping up at this, aren't you?" And then you don't get any medals for doing like the middle book in a series. You just kind of like, the fans keep returning, hopefully, and you keep the kind of story going. And it's weird in a way. I have this feeling that like, hitting the 10-year mark felt like a big milestone, and incredibly, I had some lovely, loyal, long-term fans who got on board with it, and and this felt like a kind of, I was too stupid to quit, and then people go like, "Oh, hang on a minute, like you've wow, like you've kept at it this long, that's amazing." And then, and now they're like, I can say to them, "Well, yeah, and I can tell you there are three more stories to go." And then the story will be completed. And then I don't know what I'm waiting for. Maybe somebody will kind of emerge from the shadows and finally give me the medal I've been so desperate for saying like, "Oh, you did it." But I don't know. I love world building. I've always loved these bigger storylines, and it's stupidly ambitious, but I've always felt a bit driven in that regard. It's always been a bit of a mission. It's probably like making a rod for my own back, to be honest, but I don't know, like maybe I could have made like 100 issue ones in the time it's taken me to do this, but I'm lucky in that I've been able to diversify a bit down the line. But yeah, I'll always keep coming back to After, I think, because like that's my mission basically. I have to complete this, and then I'll probably collapse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's definitely a testament to just sticking with it, and but I think when you do something long enough, like the thought of not doing it becomes the scary thing, right?
Yeah, it's probably like was it like a sunk cost fallacy as well? It's like I've invested so much at this point. It's like I can't quit. I have to make it mean something.
Yeah,
and they'll make a statue of me when I'm done.
Well, but I do think that Kickstarter is another thing that is enabling the return of the serialized format in a way that the direct market is no longer set up for. The direct market, that very many shops have moved away from filling up their stores with extensive back stock, and I think for a while graphic novels sort of made it so that was possible, but now with everything becoming traded, graphic novels are just like heavier, thicker comics. And so the shop that is going to keep every volume of every long running series in stock at all times, so that when the new thing comes out, you can go and get caught up if you have never experienced it. It's tough. It's few and far between in terms of the shops that actually are able to do that. But what's so brilliant about Kickstarter is most creators are, either they're the one people on planet Earth that has that stock, or they're willing to reprint or remaster or relaunch a version of it so that every launch can be a fresh jumping on point. And so I think at least on this platform, I am starting to see my buddy Kevin Joseph. I just saw he just sent out his pre-launch page for the 15th issue of his series Tart. And I know that there are some series, Miskatonic High, I think is in the 20s maybe, there's a number of long running series that are able to really just find that audience, keep that audience, and grow that audience on Kickstarter. And so maybe you're not so crazy after all.
Maybe so. Maybe it was genius all the while. But yeah, it's funny in an odd way. Like I still feel I have a tremendous amount to learn, constantly. I feel like it's always changing. It's always growing as a platform, try my best to keep on top of it. But yeah, like it's I don't know. There's always room for improvement, I feel.
Absolutely. Hey, are you up for a little speed round of questions? I got a few questions for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course.
Sure. Okay. Question number 1, finish this sentence. Kickstarter is blank.
A complex, challenging, but rewarding platform.
Very nice. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but Kickstarter has been making a bunch of changes and many would say improvements to the platform lately. It seems like they're shaking things up a bit. But if you could change one thing about the Kickstarter platform, what would you change?
The main body page, where you actually upload the content of your campaign, because I think having a single rich text column is a bit basic nowadays, and as evidenced by how people are homebrewing it to make their own graphics, their own images. I don't know, just one big column seems a bit old fashioned now.
All right, what would you say? I think this journal is going to be it, but besides the Comics Writers Journal, what would you say your secret weapon, a tool, a resource, an app, or something that you couldn't make comics or create without?
Well, up until the creation of the journal, I probably would have said Excel spreadsheets, because that's how I used to do it. That's how I used to do it. My life was actually, still most of my life is lived through spreadsheets, because I'm a very cool man and popular. But I think, I don't know, having
dreaming of macros.
Thank you. Yeah, having something to make lists on, having something to make boxes and organize your thoughts is invaluable.
Yeah. So I'm going to adapt this speed round question a little bit, but because I just had someone attend one of my classes recently and was asking about fulfillment and fulfillment tips. And as someone that's never actually fulfilled a Kickstarter project from the UK, do you have any UK specific fulfillment or shipping tips? Something that creators that are specifically, all my listeners that are in the UK, anything that works for you in terms of actually doing the daunting task of getting these things shipped out around the world potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. We use BackerKit. I mean, that's pretty universal. I think you could, use that anywhere. Perhaps one of the biggest tools in our arsenal is a Dymo label printer, which I don't think I could love a human baby as much as I love that machine. It's incredible. We also use the Royal Mails, because we've got a couple of services. We've got Drop and Go, where you fill out a form, you turn up at the post office, you hand over the form, and then they charge like a preloaded card, which we used to do. And that's not bad in kind of, if you're doing like mid-level shipping, you've still got the hassle of going like, did you put enough money on the card? Did you do this? Click and I think it's Click and Go or Click and Drop is a great service that Royal Mail offers. They don't advertise it massively well, but you can essentially do it all online. You prepay for everything. It even prints out labels in the correct format, which if you happen to be using a label printer, a thermal label printer, it will just spit out for you. And then, you can label everything. It's all sorted for, customs. If you're doing international, everything's correct and above board. And then you can just put it in a big sack, which they all provide. And they'll either come to your house to collect it, or you can go to your local depot and drop it off. And you can just kick open the door, say, here you go, it's all prepaid, and walk away. And one of the really good things about Click and Go is it's almost like they'll deny it. They'll tell you this doesn't exist. But if you get shipping quotes, there's international standard from the UK, and there's also international economy. And international economy is much cheaper. And they'll say, oh, it will take 8 times longer. It will take 8 weeks or so to arrive. I mean, don't take my, maybe this isn't gospel, but they'll often say like, oh, it'll be 10 times as long as international standard. But often they're arriving at the exact same time. And the weird thing is, if you go to a counter of your local post office and say, could I get something for international economy? They will often go, what is that? I've never heard of it. I swear it doesn't exist,
Really?
But it does. Huh. It's cheaper, and it can really make a difference for international shipping, where some of those costs, they've gone up so much in recent years. So if you're in the UK, I would really recommend looking into international economy from a Royal Mail. It does make it a bit more manageable.
Very good. Exactly what I was looking for, Jon. You're a gentleman. All right. Last speed round question. Can you recommend one comic or book not done by you that you think more people need to check out?
I've said it. I always bring this up, but there is an amazing UK creator called Kate Ashwin who makes a webcomic called Widdershins, and I think if I was maybe like the second UK creator on Kickstarter in 2012, Kate was the first. I continually feel like such an amateur compared to Kate. She's just the absolute benchmark for a successful independent comic book writer and artist. And she's doing a webcomic like 3 times a week, living off it once a year. Does a tremendously successful Kickstarter where she, motivates her audience. Everyone comes and gets involved, and frankly, like I said, I feel like a fraud and incompetent compared to her, because she's just absolutely crushing it, and incredible storytelling as well. So I'd recommend Widdershins by Kate Ashwin.
Awesome, Jon. Well, hey, I've loved having this chat. I want to give you an opportunity. Do you have maybe one final piece of advice for the comics writers out there? You can feel free to tie it into how they might apply it or use it in the comics writer's journal. But just one more piece of advice or tip that you give for the novice or aspiring writer looking to take their comics up a notch.
I would say get to know the difference between comedy and humor, by which I mean humor is internal. Humor is the ultimate in joke. Like, humor is something that you and your friends understand, but outsiders don't. Comedy is the point where you take humor, you sand off the rough edges, you polish it, you think about how to present it to an audience, and you put it out in the world. Some people still don't like it. That's why, people have different tastes. But the point is, you have to critically assess your own jokes before working out if they're going to be funny to anyone else. So now, take joke and replace it with action, comedy, plot. The point is, whatever you're working on, I think it really, the biggest skill you can have is to just put yourself in the shoes of the audience and think, why should they buy your comic? And maybe you're not even selling it, but like, why should they invest in your comic? Why should they care about your comic? Like, if you're making a superhero comic, as an example, why should they care about your superhero comic when Superman exists? I think you really have to just step out for a moment, look at it as critically as you can and think, what is it about my story which is special and incredible? And then make the harsh choices if you need to. Cut the things that aren't working. I think having a bit of self-awareness will do you wonders, because you might care about your story. It might mean the world to you. You have to make everyone else care. So what are the obstacles to that? So I would say comedy in one camp, humor in the other. Work out where you're going to sit.
Very good. Now, besides wrapping up this launch and getting these journals out into some inspiring writers' hands, what else has you most excited about what you're working on in 2023?
Well, I'm gonna be frustrating and say a couple of things that I'm not allowed to talk about because they're currently under NDA. But obviously, the big release of Toxic Crusaders will be very exciting. I'm really looking forward to that getting out into the world after all the work we've put in. And I think my next project after the journal will be the RPG of Afterlife Inc., which has been in development for the past year, and another RPG which I'm developing with my colleague Nick from Big Punch Studios, who has himself a bit of pedigree when it comes to getting these games out, because he did a very, very, very successful solo RPG called Colossal. So yeah, we love comics, but we also love our games. So I think there's going to be a bit of a fusion of the two in the immediate future.
Awesome. So more comics and games to look out for. Besides, we're going to link up to your Kickstarter for the Comics Writers Journal so that our listeners can go grab themselves a copy if they want. We'll also link up to Big Punch Studios website. Where else, or what's the best place to keep up with your daily or monthly musings, or just keep in touch with you?
The Big Punch website's a pretty good place. You can check out all our comics, all our games, all our podcasts. I mean, your listeners have probably guessed I love the sound of my own voice. So, I'm forever talking about one thing or another, and we record it and get it out into the world. But yeah, aside from the Big Punch website, you can check out my personal website, which is jonlock.com, JONLOCK.com. And that's got a link to all my personal projects as well.
Awesome, Jon. Well, I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your resources with the Comics Launch audience. Looking forward to seeing this do well, and then seeing more comics made with it. So I appreciate you.
And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thanks everyone else for tuning in and watching. Jon and I can't wait to see what you all launch next. Take care, everybody.